Silk was gone, the gold vanished. The intoxicating scent of rare incense, once her constant companion through polished marble halls, had been violently ripped away, replaced by the choking stench of stale sweat, unwashed skin, and the cured leather of Roman armor. The soldiers were not merely stationed outside her chamber door, they were inside, always. Their eyes, cold and calculating, watched her every breath, measured every subtle shift of her body, every blink of her weary eyelids. Cleopatra VII Philopator, a woman of 39 years, sat upon a plain wooden chair, one that had once belonged to a mere servant. She felt the rough, splintered grain of the cheap wood pressing painfully through the thin linen shift, the only garment they had allowed her to keep. Her ears caught the guttural Latin of the guards, their voices sharp, discussing her as if she were an inanimate object, a piece of forgotten furniture. They assumed she understood nothing, yet the bitter taste of iron coated her tongue, a phantom memory of biting through her own lip 3 days prior. That was when the horrifying truth had been whispered to her, Octavian's true intentions for her once she reached Rome, a journey that would begin in just 23 days. She had been the last pharaoh of Egypt, sovereign of the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean. She had been the consort of Julius Caesar, the wife of Marcus Antonius, the mother of 4 children who carried the vibrant blood of both Ptolemy and Rome. She had commanded entire fleets, negotiated with emperors, and conversed eloquently in 9 languages. Scholars sought her out for philosophical debates, generals for war strategy. The legendary library of Alexandria itself existed because her ancestors had willed it into being. The towering lighthouse that safely guided countless ships to harbor bore her family's illustrious name. She was Isis made flesh, a living goddess, queen of kings. Now she was a captive within her own palace, surrounded by men who had received precise instructions. Keep her alive, but know that certain liberties might be taken in the process. Her garment, so thin it offered no comfort, no modesty. The door, once a symbol of sanctuary, now offered no lock from the inside. Her gaze, weary but vigilant, was fixed upon it constantly. She silently counted the hours, waiting for Octavian to decide he had extracted enough information, enough obedience, enough crushing humiliation to finally move her to the next dreadful stage. But there were truths she did not yet know, horrors still unfolding beyond her gilded cage. She did not know that her son, Caesarion, a boy of 17, the child she had borne with Julius Caesar, the one meant to inherit Egypt and perhaps even Rome itself, had already been captured while attempting to flee east.
She did not know he was being brought back to Alexandria, a pawn in Octavian's cruel game, so the victor could decide whether to execute him before her eyes or after she was gone. She did not yet know that her 3 younger children, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, both 10 years old, and little Ptolemy Philadelphus, just 6, had already been declared property of the Roman state. They would be raised within Octavian's own household, leaving trophies, undeniable proof of his conquest. What she did know, with chilling certainty, was that the god rotation had shifted 2 hours ago. What she knew was that the men of the night watch were not the same as those who guarded her by day. What she knew was that the night commander, a centurion named Gaius Cornelius, had made his expectations unmistakably clear. Expectations subtly exchanged for water, for blankets, for the brief, fragile illusion of privacy. What she knew with stark clarity was that death was the final thing she still controlled. You do not yet know, but will soon understand, that what transpired during those final 23 days was far, far worse than any romantic legend has ever dared to suggest. The serpent, in his swift embrace, was an act of profound mercy compared to the slow, deliberate torment Octavian had intended. The woman who chose her own death did so not from despair, but from cold, hard calculation. The alternative was so utterly appalling that oblivion, true oblivion, became the only rational choice. This harrowing truth has been buried for 2 millennia, suffocated beneath layers of poetry, propaganda, and fanciful tales. You were taught the version Rome wanted remembered, the beautiful queen, the tragic romance. That, however, is not this story. Tonight, you will finally learn what truly happened to Cleopatra after the crushing defeat at Actium, a catastrophe that obliterated her fleet, bled her kingdom dry, and left Egypt already carved up among Roman officials even before any formal surrender. You will learn what Marcus Antonius's death actually looked like. Not the noble Roman suicide of legend, but a prolonged, agonizing failure that Cleopatra was cruelly forced to witness, her garments soaked in his lifeblood. You will learn what it truly meant to be Octavian's prisoner, what the nights held when interrogations took on a different, darker hue, what transpired when gods, convinced of hidden treasure, decided that restraint was entirely optional. You will learn what it meant to be kept alive, not out of any mercy, but because a living, breathing body held far greater propaganda value than a mere corpse. You will learn what Octavian had meticulously planned for her in Rome: the heavy chains, the jeering crowds, the slow, agonizing march of public humiliation, the utter destruction of a living goddess, reduced to nothing more than conquered property.
You will understand why, once Cleopatra learns these precise details, she began a desperate, active search for any method of death her captors might have overlooked. You will learn what truly happened to her children, what Rome did to the son of Julius Caesar, where the twins were taken, how an entire bloodline was erased, deliberately, methodically, as a code act of imperial policy. You already know the comforting myth. This is not that story. This is the precise moment everything collapsed. The decisive Battle of Actium was fought on September 2nd, 31 BCE, off the western coast of Greece. Cleopatra herself commanded 60 elite Egyptian warships, vessels crewed by men trained in naval combat for generations. Antonius led roughly 230 allied ships. Octavian, however, commanded a formidable fleet of 400. The sheer numbers whispered the ending long before it arrived. The reality, however, was far, far worse. Cleopatra watched from the deck of her flagship, the Antonius. She saw Roman formations close in like a crushing vice. Ships were relentlessly boarded, chained together, then set ablaze. Men she had known for years, men she had trusted, drowned in waters that swiftly turned crimson, then utterly black beneath smoke so dense that the sun above appeared as nothing more than a dull crimson disk. Then she made a decision that historians have fiercely debated for 2,000 years. She ordered her squadron to break formation and flee. Roman writers, eager to paint her as a villain, branded it cowardice. Modern historians, with a clearer perspective, often call it a strategic retreat. Yet surviving correspondence suggests something else entirely: a brutal recognition. The battle was irretrievably lost. Saving 60 ships, her last remaining fleet, mattered infinitely more than sacrificing them to a pointless theatrical spectacle. Antonius, witnessing her sails turn, abandoned his own command. He transferred to a swifter vessel and followed her into the chaotic wake. They did not speak for 3 agonizing days. According to Charmian, a loyal servant who would later die beside her, Cleopatra spent the entire voyage refusing food, refusing sleep. She wrote letters only to immediately burn them, scattering the ashes into the wind. Charmian's account of her queen during that time was chillingly clinical. She sits and writes and destroys. Her eyes are open, but they do not see this world. I fear the queen has already gone somewhere we cannot reach. Cleopatra was not mourning, she was calculating. Egypt's treasury was almost entirely empty. The vital grain harvest had failed twice in a row. Roman merchants, sensing the shift in power, had withdrawn their support. Allied kingdoms, once loyal, were now defecting one by one. She had months, perhaps weeks at best.
She attempted everything at once: frantic negotiation, desperate preparation for a protracted siege, and a last-ditch plan for escape. Treasure fleets laden with accumulated dynastic wealth were dispatched towards the Red Sea. They were intercepted, captured. 15 ships carrying the hopes of a dynasty fell into Roman hands. She offered abdication, a complete surrender of power in exchange for her children's safety. Octavian replied ambiguously, promising nothing concrete, only advancing steadily, relentlessly towards Alexandria. She fortified the city, stockpiled weapons, and ominously began collecting poisons. Multiple historical sources confirm this grim detail. Cleopatra tested various toxins on condemned prisoners, meticulously timing their deaths, noting the duration of pain, the speed of incapacitation, the final moments of consciousness. Hemlock, she decided, was rejected. Too slow, too agonizingly aware. She was planning the one escape Octavian could not block. Meanwhile, Antonius withdrew into a deep, desperate isolation, drinking himself into a constant state of oblivion. Cleopatra visited him less and less frequently. One account records her saying, with a profound weariness, "He is already dead. His body has simply not realized it." When Rome's forces finally arrived, resistance in Alexandria collapsed almost immediately. The cavalry defected en masse. The fleet surrendered without a single battle. By nightfall, Cleopatra had sealed herself inside her mausoleum, a grand tomb she had prepared for herself. She sent word to Octavian that she was dead. It was a cruel twist, one that drove him to stab himself. But he failed to die, bleeding profusely, conscious, begging to be finished. He was carried an agonizing journey across the city to her tomb. Cleopatra, unwilling to open the doors and risk capture, refused entry. Instead, she lowered ropes, and together with her loyal servants, she hauled him upward, his wounds gushing, his blood soaking her garments as he was lifted. He died in her arms an hour later. She remained with his body for days, a vigil of despair and grim determination. When Romans finally forced entry, she was moments from drinking the carefully chosen poison. Proculus, Octavian's man, seized her wrists. The vial, her final escape, was taken. Within hours, her grand palace became her stark prison. Her first meeting with Octavian followed days later. She begged for her children, offered immense wealth, promised full cooperation, even shared valuable knowledge. Octavian listened, his gaze cold, mostly asking about hidden treasure. He warned her, his voice flat, that her value alone determined her survival. The interrogations began. They were not cruel torture, but something far, far worse. Sleep deprivation, constant invasive surveillance, and deliberate soul-crushing humiliation. And during the long, terrifying nights, access.
Rồng kể chuyện, đọc to rõ ràng và biến tấu giọng hay hơn. Rồng kể chuyện, speak with extreme caution, but the chilling pattern is unmistakable. Guards were granted liberties, provided no visible marks remained upon her. After a week, her spirit began to retreat. After 2, her voice fell silent, her eyes seeing without truly seeing. Charmian would later write, "The queen is no longer present. Her eyes are open, but she is gone." The queen's vacant stare, which had haunted Charmian for weeks, snapped back into focus with chilling precision. Then Dolabella came. He brought with him not pity, but information, a chillingly detailed account of Octavian's true intentions. He spoke not of mercy, but of the ultimate humiliation. She would be taken to Rome, he revealed, paraded through the city streets in heavy chains,
a living spectacle of conquest. Behind her, her own children would follow, bound, utterly helpless. And after the grand triumphal procession, they would be strangled, quietly, methodically. Caesarion, her eldest, the son she had borne with Caesar himself, had already been captured. He would be killed without fanfare, his death a mere formality. Too many Caesars, Dolabella explained with a shrug, was simply too dangerous. In that single, horrifying revelation, a profound clarity descended upon Cleopatra. It was as if a thick fog had lifted, revealing a treacherous, undeniable path forward. Death was not despair, it was strategy. It was the last, most potent weapon in her arsenal. It was the final, unassailable act of defiance against a foe determined to obliterate her dignity, her legacy, and her bloodline. Her mind, once clouded by grief and the relentless torment of captivity, now sharpened. She began to plan, meticulously, with the same strategic brilliance she had once applied to naval battles and political negotiations. She needed to regain control of her final moments, to reclaim the ending of her own story. Her first request was simple, yet laden with symbolism. She asked to be allowed to visit the tomb of Marcus Antonius, her beloved husband, her fallen warrior. The Roman guards, interpreting this as a sign of her final surrender to grief, reluctantly agreed. They saw it as one last public display of a broken woman. She approached the mausoleum with a stately grace they hadn't witnessed in weeks. Inside, she offered solemn prayers, her voice strong and clear, speaking to Antonius not as a mourner, but as an equal, a queen preparing for her own journey. She made silent vows, reaffirming her resolve. Returning to her makeshift prison, her demeanor had shifted entirely. She requested a bath, not for cleansing, but for a ritual purification. She asked for her finest garments, not for vanity, but to dress for her eternal coronation. This was not an act of surrender, it was a preparation for apathesis.
She bathed in fragrant oils, her body once again feeling like her own. Her loyal handmaidens, Iras and Charmian, helped her don a magnificent golden robe, embroidered with sacred symbols, a queen's raiment. Her hair was carefully styled, her crown placed upon her head. Then came the final, crucial request, a meal simple yet satisfying. Figs, she specified, plump and sweet, delivered in a basket. The guards, ever vigilant for weapons or poison, meticulously searched every fold of her robe, every seam of her garments, every corner of her room. They found nothing. Their attention, however, was drawn to the visible contents of the basket. They saw only fruit, innocent and appealing. They did not search beneath the layers of figs concealed amongst the leaves, where a small, deadly serpent lay coiled, its ancient venom a promise of swift, merciful release. With the basket placed before her, the guards, satisfied, retreated to their positions just outside the door. Cleopatra, Iras, and Charmian were granted the brief, precious illusion of privacy. Cleopatra took a deep, steadying breath. She looked at her loyal companions, her eyes conveying a silent gratitude, a shared understanding of the gravity of this moment. They were not just servants, they were sisters in defiance. She reached into the basket, her fingers tracing the cool, smooth skin of the asp. This was it, the final, sovereign act of the last pharaoh. No chains, no cheering crowds, no Roman triumph, only dignity, a swift exit on her own terms. The bite was quick, precise, a sudden sharp prick, then a spreading warmth, an insidious numbness beginning to course through her veins. Iras, ever loyal, followed her queen's example, choosing to join her in death rather than endure a Roman future. Charmian, her face edged with sorrow and fierce pride, remained. She had one final duty, one last act of service to her queen.
She watched as Cleopatra's breathing softened, as the light slowly faded from her eyes, leaving behind a serene, almost triumphant expression. When the guards, after a tense silence, finally forced their way into the chamber, they found a scene carefully orchestrated for defiance. Cleopatra lay arranged as if in peaceful sleep, her golden robe flowing around her, her crown still perfectly in place. Iras lay still beside her, having chosen the same fate. Charmian, her face streaked with tears, but her posture regal, was adjusting Cleopatra's crown, a final, tender gesture of unwavering loyalty. "Was this well done?" one of the Roman guards sneered, his voice laced with frustration at their thwarted spectacle. Charmian met his gaze, her eyes blazing with an unyielding pride. "It was," she replied, her voice steady and clear, "fitting for a queen descended from 10,000 kings." Then, with a sudden sharp pain, she too collapsed, having found her own means to follow her beloved queen.
Cleopatra VII Philopator was 39 years old. She had ruled Egypt for 21 years. She had been a prisoner for precisely 23 days. Octavian, the mighty conqueror, was denied his ultimate trophy. His grand procession through Rome, meant to showcase a living goddess in chains, would be empty of its most prized captive. This, then, was her final profound victory, a refusal to let Rome write her ending, a refusal to be anything less than a queen, even in death. She did not lose to a snake. She refused to let Rome write her ending, and in doing so, secured a victory that transcended physical life. Her choice was not one of despair, but of radical autonomy, a final, unyielding stand against utter subjugation. Octavian's reaction when the news reached him was not of grief, nor even of surprise, but of incandescent, unbridled fury. He had been denied. The ultimate trophy, the living proof of his triumph over the East, the last pharaoh of Egypt, had slipped through his grasping fingers in a final, audacious act of self-sovereignty. His grand procession through Rome, years in the making, meticulously planned to showcase a defeated goddess in chains, was now ruined. The spectacle he had envisioned, the public humiliation of the woman who had captivated both Caesar and Antonius, would forever remain an unfulfilled fantasy. He ordered the immediate removal of Cleopatra's body, along with those of Iris and Charmian. Though dead, she would still be put on display, albeit a silent, lifeless one. Her physical form, even in death, served as a stark reminder of Roman conquest, a chilling warning to any who dared defy the new emperor. But it lacked the visceral, living humiliation he had craved. The Roman physicians, skilled in their craft, meticulously examined the bodies, confirming the cause of death. The asp, a symbol of royalty in Egypt, had become her instrument of ultimate freedom. Octavian, in a fit of pique, had the creature ritually destroyed, as if its very existence were an affront to his authority. But Cleopatra's final act of defiance had far-reaching consequences beyond his momentary rage. It shifted the narrative of her end, turning her from a mere captive into a figure of tragic yet powerful agency. It cemented her place in history not as a broken queen, but as a woman who, facing an unbearable choice, seized control of her own destiny. Yet for her children, the grim wheels of Roman fate continued to turn, unforgiving and relentless. Caesarion, her 17-year-old son by Julius Caesar, the one Octavian had declared too many Caesars, received no such mercy, no final act of choice.
He was brought back to Alexandria, likely under the guise of being offered clemency, or perhaps even a minor role in Egypt. But for Octavian, the existence of another Caesar was a political threat too grave to ignore. Caesarion, just a boy on the cusp of manhood, was quietly executed. His death, efficient and without fanfare, erased a potential rival, extinguished a direct bloodline to the divine Julius Caesar, and ensured Octavian's sole claim to that powerful name. It was a cold, calculated act, the ruthless pragmatism of a man forging an empire. The details of his death are scant, shrouded in the victor's deliberate silence,
a testament to its purely political necessity. Cleopatra's three younger children, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the 10-year-old twins she had shared with Antonius, and little Ptolemy Philadelphus, a mere 6 years old, was spared execution, but their fate was in its own way a prolonged and subtle cruelty. They were declared property of the Roman state, ripped from their homeland, from their culture, from everything they had ever known. They were paraded in Octavian's triumph through Rome, not in chains, but as living, breathing symbols of their mother's defeat and their father's downfall. They walked behind a colossal effigy of their dead mother, holding the very asp that had taken her life, a grotesque mockery of a mourning procession. Then they were placed in the household of Octavia the Younger, Octavian's sister, a woman known for her virtue and compassion. There, within the gilded cages of Roman aristocracy, they were raised as Romans. Their Egyptian names, their rich heritage, their very identities were systematically stripped away. Alexander Helios, the elder twin, faded from history, his life undocumented beyond his relocation. There is no record of his adulthood, no mention of his legacy. His very existence was absorbed and erased by the Roman machine. Cleopatra Selene, however, found a measure of influence. She was later married to Juba II, a Romanized Numidian king, and became Queen of Mauritania. She ruled well, injecting some Hellenistic culture into her new kingdom, but she was a Roman queen, far removed from the Nile and the pharaonic heritage of her mother. Her children would be Roman. Ptolemy Philadelphus, the youngest, vanishes completely from the historical record after the triumph. His ultimate fate, like that of his brother, remains unknown, a silent testament to the thoroughness of Rome's imperial policy. An entire bloodline, the storied Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries, was deliberately, methodically extinguished.
Octavian's triumph, though denied the living presence of Cleopatra, was still a magnificent spectacle. The streets of Rome erupted with cheers for their victorious leader. Untold riches from Egypt, gold, jewels, exotic animals, ancient artifacts were paraded through the forum, signifying the unparalleled wealth now flowing into Roman coffers. The effigy of Cleopatra, cold and unmoving, still served its propaganda purpose, a visual confirmation of Egypt's subjugation. But the true story, the raw, brutal truth of those final 23 days, the methodical humiliation, the unbearable choices forced upon a queen, was buried deep. It was replaced by a carefully curated narrative, one crafted by the victors, the tragic romance, the beautiful, seductive queen who, in a fit of despair, chose a romanticized death by a serpent's kiss. This is the version that endured for 2,000 years, passed down through poetry, plays, and art. It is a powerful, captivating myth, but it is not the reality. The truth, as you now know, reveals a woman of extraordinary intellect and unbreakable will, who, stripped of everything else, still found a way to resist, to deny her enemy the ultimate satisfaction of her public degradation. Remember her not as a myth, not as a tragic romance, but as resistance personified. She did not lose to a snake. She refused to let Rome write her ending. Her final, calculated act was a testament to the enduring human spirit's capacity for agency, even in the face of absolute power. It serves as a potent reminder that history, often written by the conquerors, rarely tells the whole truth. To truly understand, we must look beyond the legends, question the narratives, and seek out the difficult, buried truths that illuminate the profound choices made by those who dared to defy.